Hello everyone, if you please take your seat. So my friend Carlos tells me that the way you're supposed to use a microphone is by putting it up to your chin. It feels really weird, but I'm going to try it. So, welcome to our Corporate Governance Symposium. This has actually been over 2 years in the making. It's an idea that we had a while ago, before COVID in fact, to try to do something a little bit different, a little bit fresh, and to speak about corporate governance in a way that everyone would be able to see, because we all learn a lot by example. It's one thing to study governance in a course, but seeing it happen in real life is incredibly valuable. The experienced investor fund regime places a huge amount of reliance on the EIF directors. They are, in essence, the eyes and ears of the regulator on the board of every fund. And the funds, these funds are therefore regulated, and that is the principal way in which they are regulated. Obviously, they have to submit regulatory returns and audit statements, but practically, in terms of how the regulator protects the investors and how the regulator protects the reputation of the jurisdiction, in my opinion, it's through the EIF directors. And so we wanted to show you a little bit about how it's done. We wanted to speak about what powers the regulator has and how that can marry with the EIF directors. So we have a three-pronged event now. We're going to start by hearing a talk by the Deputy Chairman Jay, who's going to speak about the technical and source of the powers of the regulator in respect to experienced investor funds. And then we're going to have our little play in 2 acts. There will be a short intermission between the acts. And then we will end with a panel discussion where we will discuss possibly the play and the different possibilities that could arise as a result of it. So I would ask you to remember, and to keep this in mind at all times, that the opinions of the actors as actors are not necessarily, and in many cases necessarily not their own, but they're actors. So without further ado, Jay Gomez.
Before I start, I should probably try and dispel one myth, which was bugging the industry for some time, and that was whether EIFs are actually regulated or authorized. That myth really comes from some of the legislative drafting that was in some of the old provisions of the legislation, which referred to the term deemed authorized and caused all sorts of confusion as to whether or not it is or was actually authorized and regulated or not. It is a myth. It is authorized, and it's also regulated. It's everything that you want it to be by the regulator. And evidence of that is the fact that the regulator has regulatory powers. I am not in the regulated space myself. I'm not, don't form part of any financial institution. The regulator doesn't have powers over me. In the case of an EIF, it's clear that it is authorized and it is regulated. And the legislation was actually also amended to clarify that. In our industry, trust is arguably one of the most important things that enables us and fund managers to raise capital. And in order to achieve that trust, we have to make sure that the legislation is fit for purpose, and one of those elements is making sure that the regulator has the necessary powers that it needs. And that then translates into confidence in the market, trust, etc. And arguably, this sector is the sector that the regulator has the most power in. In most, when you're looking at other financial institutions, usually the powers are contained in one bit of legislation. In the case of the EIF, it's not one, it's not two, it's actually three, as we'll come on to see. And a lot of those powers are replicated, but that was actually intended as a result of a lot of lobbying from Gfia to make sure that the FSC had the powers that it needed to. And in the back of the mind was that element of trust and confidence. So the first part is the regulatory powers that are contained in the Financial Services Act 2019. Those powers are pretty far-reaching. They're contained within Chapter 7 of, I think it's Part 18 of the Act. And essentially it gives the regulators powers, as you can see on screen, so to revoke the fund's authorization, to suspend its authorization, to apply to a court for a protection order, and the list goes on. The grounds for intervention, so when the regulator is taking that enforcement power, there has to be an element of proportionality. It can't just go in guns blazing and do as it pleases, because that obviously would be contrary to exactly what I was explaining before in terms of trust and confidence. So the legislation goes on to explain the situations and the grounds in which the regulator can intervene. There are a number of specific grounds that are listed within the legislation. And in some situations, the powers that the regulator have are so extensive that it can't actually be taken by a small group of individuals within the regulator in their own right. It actually requires the approval of what the Act calls the DMC, the Decision-Making Committee, which is an independent body from the regulator appointed by the Minister for Financial Services. And that includes, from memory, a minimum of 3 individuals who are lawyers and 3 individuals who are experts in financial services. From memory, that the DMC was first constituted under this Act shortly after this came into effect. And I don't think, unless Sam jumps in and corrects me, I don't think the DMC has been changed since. It's people like Sapita Caruana, Nigel Featon from Hassan's, and a few other individuals from the financial services sector. I won't bore you with too much of the detail, but the reference is basically that part from the Act for the enforcement powers. In case there was any doubt as to whether an experienced investor fund may or may not be a collective investment scheme, it's clear that it is, in my opinion, but in case there was any doubt, the same powers are then replicated in the experienced investor fund regulations, which is the next title. Thank you. In Regulation 23A, so this is the main body of legislation that deals with experienced investor fund, how one goes about getting an experienced investor fund authorized, what it can, can't do, etc. And within the body of that legislation, we have specific powers in respect of, just pause for one sec, in respect of an EIF. Some of these powers are quite extensive, requesting existing telephone and existing data traffic records. It's things that perhaps we might not even have occurred to us that the regulator could request. So you'll see that they're quite extensive. And of course, this should be in the back of a director's mind when they're dealing with tricky situations within the fund, particularly those EIF directors who arguably have a non-exec role as well. And we shouldn't at the same time be worried about the powers that the FSC has. Instead, we should see them as a tool. So in a situation, and I think the play will go on to this, in a situation where the EIF directors find themselves in a position where perhaps it's uncomfortable or they think that the manager's doing something that they shouldn't be doing, they should feel able to discuss their issues with the FSC, to ask the FSC to consider perhaps invoking some of those powers. Now, for the regulator, like I mentioned before, there's a proportionality test as to how they invoke those powers and when they invoke them. A lot of these powers, when invoked, arguably in the case of the fund, go beyond the point of no return, i.e. the minute the regulator jumps in, you potentially damage the reputation of the fund. The likelihood is that it's not going to be able to raise capital again, it's going to lose the confidence of its existing investors, etc., etc. So a lot of the time what the EIF directors should hopefully find is that the FSC engages with those EIF directors and doesn't necessarily take regulatory action, but asks the EIF directors keep them involved. They may discuss potential options, potential routes before the regulator has to jump in and use those powers that it has. And the last bit of regulatory powers is contained in the AFIM regulations. This would apply to an EIF that has both registered as a self-managed small AFIM, but also an EIF that has opted out of AFIM under the dual regime. And it may sound a little bit odd to think that you opt out of the regulations, but still these powers continue to apply. That was done on purpose, because what we didn't want to do was allow a fund to opt out under the dual regime of having to comply with the AFIM regulations, and the regulator suddenly loses their powers that they would otherwise have in this bit of law. And this is particularly important because it stems from the EU directive. The powers are very, very similar, as you'll see repetition from the EIF regulations, telephone records and data traffic records. So really there's not much more to it than that. So without further ado, I'll hand over to the actors to kick off their play. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've covered point 5. Point 6 is the investment opportunity. So would you like to just give us a bit of a background? We've already looked at the book pack.
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting, it's a unique opportunity. This shouldn't take us very long. So there's a property that we are aware of. We've been aware for some time, and it's about to come on market. We have an inside route to the seller who needs some capital for an entirely different project. He's offering it to us right now, right here, right now. This is right within our sweet spot. This is probably the best transaction we've seen, the best opportunity we've seen in the life of this entire fund. So you've got the numbers, you've got the information. We propose that we move forward with this investment.
Yeah, look, we've looked at what's in the board pack. I think we just had a quick discussion because we couldn't find the independent valuation.
Yeah, I see that you've got an internal one, and the numbers look great.
You're right, it's fantastic. It really is.
But yeah, I mean, are we missing something?
No, no.
The independent valuation.
Of course, we will do an independent valuation. There's no problem with that. We always do independent valuations, as you know very well, and all the investments that we've made. It's a timing issue, to be honest. We have to exchange contracts tomorrow, or we lose this. It goes to the market. The independent valuation, absolutely we will do, like we always do for our investments, and that should come in about a week and a half or so.
Yeah, in the PPM we have a section 7.1, and it says that we need the evaluation before we go ahead with any investment. So I think we're just looking at the protecting investors.
Are you guys being serious here? Come on. We have done 10 different investments in real estate. We have done internal valuations. Whenever we ask for an external valuation, risk valuation, our internal valuation was very conservative. The risk valuation confirmed that the projects were even better than what we have calculated. So now we have applied exactly the same parameters to that project, and you want to hide between some prospectus paragraph? Come on, let's be serious. We are here in the real world, not in any monkey business.
Yeah, as you rightly point out, all previous transactions, we followed this sequence. We had an outside risk valuation, and look, as I'm reading this, it's not just us nitpicking in unnecessary detail. This is quite a generalized investment strategy, but it's really specific in the sequence of this. So it's obviously quite quite an important contractual obligation.
It's quite clear in the PPM.
We've read the PPM. The question is, can you read the market? Can you read the opportunity? Do you know what's actually happening over here? You know, you can't live within a PPM. You have to live within the real world over here. We have an incredible opportunity, and we've told you we will do a valuation. If you don't believe in us, we'll indemnify that we'll do a valuation. We have three valuers who will come to us, and they compete on our deals. They'll all want to evaluate. Guys, we have no risk here. We have no risk here. We are not required to bid anywhere close to valuation. We will get a valuation. It's a question of timing.
It certainly looks like a good opportunity.
Yeah, and we fully have faith in you
It's
guys.
not good, it's excellent. What don't
Excellent.
you get?
Excellent.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
But is there no way that we can just get a RICS valuation? You know, today's Wednesday. Can't it be done by Friday?
Yes, and we lose the deal. What are you going to tell investors? We've lost the deal because the valuation came in too late. We've never based a bid on the valuation anyway. The valuation is there for support. Absolutely, we will have that. Whatever the valuation number comes out, we will anyway bid what we think. The investors trust us. They don't trust the valuer. Otherwise, the valuer will be sitting over here. He's never sitting over here. He's sitting in his office.
You guys send that deal down the pipe, then it's very clear what's gonna happen. We're gonna tell the whole world that you made them lose money. Not we. We are here to protect the interests of our investors, okay? To make money for them. That's what we are paid for. By the way, that's what we are paying you for as well. To take decisions, to make money for them. You don't want to decide. You want to let the deal go down. Everyone will know what business preventers you are. Okay? Is that clear?
With all due respect, they don't pay us to breach the contract that we have with them.
Yeah, and look, I agree, you pay us good money to be directors and we want to do a good job. So I think it's just black and white that we really need an independent valuation
Yes, sir, we will get that for you.
before we invest.
Well, that's going to be a real problem, because if you force us to do this, then what you're doing is destroying investor value. All over that PPM that you hold right now, it says we have to maximize investor value and we have to work for the investors. This is not a box ticking exercise, guys. Welcome to the real world. We have to make this investment and you cannot stop us.
You will then have your fully shiny valuation, but in the meantime, the deal is gone. So what is the valuation good for?
So I think, like on our side, we fully have faith in you guys. We think it's a great valuation.
Thank you, great.
You know, the numbers
Let's do
look
it.
really good, but we still need to comply with the PPM, and I think that's part of our role to make sure that we do. So we'll get the valuation, we'll speed it up, and then we can invest.
I don't think you guys are understanding any of this. I don't think you understand the risk-return situation that we're facing right now. Yes, you're looking into a legal document, but we live in the real world over here, and our investors expect us to maximize their returns.
Yeah.
That's what they're looking at. They're not looking at the PPM, they're looking at the NAV.
Look, you are wasting my, honestly, you are wasting my time, okay? We are not getting anywhere. So what I suggest is give us a couple of minutes here to discuss between each other.
Let's take a 5-minute
Okay,
I
break.
think that's-
and
I think that's a good
and then
idea.
because we need to move, okay? Every minute that goes by, the investment is further away. So let's move, okay?
Let's take a 5-minute break and then
Let's
we'll
do that.
reconvene.
We fire them. We get some new EIF directors in the jurisdiction. There are plenty of them that are a little bit more professional and know what business is all about. We get the deal signed, and by the way, we can change the mandate at the bank. They owe me a favor, they need to change it. 48 hours, new signatories, we move on, because they don't get it. We
Can we
need to
explain,
move.
think we can explain to these guys?
No.
They never understand.
No,
These box stickers are never going to get it.
no, they are not gonna get it. That's it.
It's over.
Yeah,
Let's do
over.
it.
I don't know. I mean, my concern is, I think, to be honest, what it's sounding like is that they're going to get rid of us.
Can they fire us though?
They can fire us, but there's obviously the issue with, and they can replace us.
But don't
There
they
might
need
be a
our
time.
signatures on the bank mandate and they need us to sign
Yeah,
off
but
on
you
this,
know what
no?
these cowboys are like, they'll probably run around and do anything. But
It is good money though, so.
yeah, I hear you, but is your license really worth the value of one EIF directorship?
Okay, let's do something. Let's go back in, let's have a chat with them, and let's try and work things out.
Yeah, well, let's just try to calm them down.
Okay.
So are you going to sign off now?
So thanks for that break. We'll carry on with item 6, which was the investment opportunity that we had. Yeah, so we're really happy with it. We went through the figures last night. We've seen your valuation. We've seen your everything that you put in the board pack. So as soon as we have the external independent valuation, we can go ahead with the investment.
You guys not getting it. You're really not understanding anything. We've explained it to you already. We have to do this valuation now. We have to do this investment now. The valuation we'll do tomorrow. What difference does it make to you guys? You're going to get it anyway.
I hear it's uncomfortable.
No,
but
you don't hear it. You
but
don't get it.
This is
Sorry.
the process
Hello.
and procedure that you wrote,
Yeah.
and that you have binding obligations to your investors for. If you breach these, you're giving each one of your investors a free ride on this. So you say that there's zero risk, but of course there's risk until you've actually followed the procedure.
I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. We're going to get rid of you. We're going to get some directors that know what business is like, are going to sign it off, and that's it. You guys are simply useless. So let's move on, and that's it. End of the story. We are getting nowhere. We are explaining to you in a nice manner, second time, a third time. You are not getting it. Fine. Okay, let's move on. Let's get new directors that know what business is about, and that's it.
It certainly feels like, from what we've been saying, we can't work together. But if you're intending to continue with this, we've got obligations to the regulator to inform him.
Yeah.
You're going to call the regulator. We're going to call the regulator.
See you at the regulator.
Who's even authorized you guys? I can only imagine the kind of training in your jurisdiction for fund directors. That is ridiculous. We're going to call the regulator. You guys are toast. You guys are fired. You guys are never going to work in this industry. It's over.
Let's go.
Well, I can't believe that they called us at 11 o'clock at night.
I know, but it's what we had to do, and we've got to hear them out. So,
All right, let's go for it.
hi, could you bring in outrageous returns, please? Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for meeting us on short
No,
notice.
you're more than welcome. Hi, please take a seat.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
So, yeah, thank you so much for meeting us on short notice. We just had a board meeting yesterday. We had a bit of a disagreement and it got a bit heated, let's say, yesterday. So we have this investment opportunity. It's a great opportunity. It looks really good. They've done all their internal figures. But the PPM does state that we need an external risk valuation or an external independent valuation, and because of time constraints, I think that we're having a bit of resistance in that.
Would you like to tell us your side of this?
Sure. So look, this is actually a really unique opportunity for us. This is probably the strongest opportunity we've come by so far. It's time sensitive. Appreciate your time making such a short notice, but we need to sign this deal today. This is what our investors want. This is what they're paying us to do. And we've done all the work that we've had to do, all our due diligence, and it all stacks up. And it's one of those cases of being in the right place at the right time type of opportunity.
And the good thing is that we understand you are a very commercial-minded and flexible regulator, so we are actually very thoughtful about that, and we think that we have a good case. and that at the end of this meeting we will have a very positive outcome and be able to progress with our investment.
Thank you for the kind words. We really appreciate that here at the FSC. I think it's important to get one thing quite clear here. Is it true that this investment would be in breach of the PPM? Is that our understanding?
7.1 of the PPM. It's quite clear.
Right.
It does say right there.
Yeah, yeah. So how would you explain not complying with this section? I mean, we certainly don't want to take any decisions for you, but still, how would you explain not complying with this section in the PPM?
Okay.
It is, after all, a promise that you made to investors and a representation on the basis of which they invested.
Okay, let me maybe explain one thing. As you might have seen or might have inspected our documentation, until now, on all the 10 investments that we have done a very conservative internal valuation. We have then requested the RICS valuation, and the RICS valuation was every time above, well above in some circumstances, our internal valuation. So we did it properly. This time we are taking the same approach, doing an internal valuation, which is again very conservative. So we don't expect the RICS valuation that the directors want to, the EIF directors at least want to request, to be different than that. So we are not changing or deviating from our approach until now.
But every investment decision that you've previously taken, you got the external valuation before. Is that correct?
It's been in line with
We will get an
It's always
external
there.
valuation as well. There's no doubt about it. We've never said we're not going to get an external valuation.
Really?
We will get an external valuation because of the time sensitivity of this matter. We need to exchange today. We'll get an external valuation before we close. We can do that. No problem at all. But we need to sign today because this is when the deal is presented itself. You're right. It talks in the PPM about an external valuation, but it also talks all over the PPM about maximizing investor value, shareholder value, and acting for the best benefit of the investors. It doesn't say it once. It says it all over that document, and that's what we're trying to do here.
So let me understand this correctly. You're saying that you want to make this investment, even though it doesn't comply with the requirements of the PPM, on the basis that it's going to be all right?
It's going to be more than all right. It's going to be excellent.
I see. Well, have you gotten express consent from all of your investors that they're comfortable with this decision?
We know our investors so well. They trust us to make these investment decisions, which is why they've given us the money to manage. This is the whole point. They haven't given their money to manage to a valuer. They've given it to us. We can tell them tonight if we like. We can give them all notice tonight about this if it makes you feel better. We'll do that. We'll get our deal. You'll get your valuation. The investors will get their return, and we'll all keep our jobs. Let's do that.
Even if we tell them tonight, I mean, if this has to be done by tomorrow, we don't really get much time.
Well,
They won't be informed
It would
correctly.
need more than a notification. It
Yeah.
needs an express consent to bypass the PPM.
And reasonable time as well.
Absolutely. I mean,
It's
You'd have-
unreasonable to wait for reasonable time when you don't have reasonable time.
we understand that this is a pressing business decision that you have to make. We're not here to make the business decisions. We're just here to act in the interests of the jurisdiction and the investors who have agreed to a fund that is regulated here.
That's perfectly true. I completely agree with you. You have
Great.
to act for the best of the jurisdiction and
And
for
you
the
agree-
reputation of the jurisdiction.
And you agree
So
that the PPMs does say that you have to wait for an external valuation. You don't dispute that?
Like you would agree, the PPM would say that we have to act in the best interests of our investors, which is what we're doing. And you are acting in the best interests of the jurisdiction, but trying to protect the jurisdiction. Do you actually want this jurisdiction to be known as a jurisdiction that is destroying value? that is not understanding the game, not understanding the investment, the risk-return opportunity over here. They're not understanding this. You're protecting the consumers of the financial products of Gibraltar, the people buying these securities of these funds. You want to destroy their value? Isn't it much better to understand the situation as a whole and make a real decision over here of what we need to do?
How can you guarantee the value without this external valuation, though?
Because we have done it in the past. 10 deals.
Because-
What proof do you want more for us?
To get it before?
10 deals. Well, that is, I think that is semantics. We can change, you would agree with us that we can change what the prospectus says. We can remove
The agreement
that
of the
risk.
investors.
Yes, we can get the agreements of the investors. They want to deal with us, so we tell them, remove that little clause. They will remove that little clause.
Not before this investment.
Look, by the way, look, we thought we would be in a very competitive jurisdiction. We would have business-minded EIF directors. I see that's not the case. I thought even we would have business-minded and flexible regulators. It doesn't appear to be the case. So you know what? You don't deserve us. Let's move into another jurisdiction where they are more flexible, and then we can keep our investors, we can continue to make money, but because really, I'm starting to be fed up in this monkey business jurisdiction, monkey directors, and eventually as well a regulator, and I need to be able to do proper business in a proper business environment.
Calm down. I'm sure the regulator will come up with a solution that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will look out for the best of the jurisdiction. They're not box tickers. They understand the investment environment. They understand what we're talking to them about now.
Really?
No need to make any rash decisions over here on this. I'm sure we can come to some common ground with them.
Our view is that investors invested partly on the basis that they realized, or that they relied on the fact that we would ensure that you would keep to the provisions of the PPM. And you do realize that this may not be entirely your decision. We're not without powers.
So you're threatening us?
I believe you were threatening the EIF directors with their expulsion.
Well, they didn't behave for what they were paid for, so we can remove them. That's a business decision. You said before you wouldn't get involved in commercial decisions. That's a commercial decisions. We think they are useless. Let's get them out of the way.
If you're threatening to remove the EIF directors because they're performing their responsibility...
No, we are replacing them.
Because
Is there an EIF director in the House? Anyone?
you're threatening to replace them because they're not because they're trying to ensure that they're doing their responsibility to the investors. Investors signed a contract and they agreed, and you also signed that as well. You agreed all these protections were going to be put in place when the investors were brought into the fund. This isn't your money, it's the investors' money.
Exactly, and we need EIF directors looking out for the benefit of our investors, not the box tickers with a maniacal focus on some technicality.
Thank you, you mentioned that. Do you need anything else?
No, I think we've got everything we need from that. Thank you.
I think we've heard what we need to. We need to confer internally and come to a decision. So thank you very much.
What are our options?
Well, we do have powers, but
We do.
we try to use those sparingly, and it's not so easy to use them. We'd have to go to the DMC first. That takes up a lot of resources, but on the other hand, this seems like a case. This is and I do feel for them because I believe that it really is a good investment opportunity, and they should be able to do it with their own money.
I mean, they've made some very good returns from what I can see. But again, we're here to perform a job. We're here to protect the jurisdiction and the investors. So.
Yeah. You know what? I think we should ask the audience what they think. So, so Jay, how would you have liked for that to end?
It's a tricky one. Because I think for the regulator to intervene on something like that requires a lot of thought in terms of the investor detriment that potentially could happen. What happens with the EIF directors if they allow it to go through? I think the best scenario there would have been for everyone to have stood their ground and simply the investment not have happened. But I think Benji and Carlos seemed pretty adamant that it was going to happen one way or another.
I think from our perspective, I hope you don't mind me saying this, and I think Greg and James did a good job of being regulators, and I'm sure they'll be very good regulators someday. But it's probably not exactly how the FSC would have managed that situation. I think our role is not so much to be sort of an arbitrator, sort of the court, the judge, and it's not really to provide advice in situations, and we wouldn't really get involved in sort of commercial decisions, and we're sort of more concerned about achieving our objectives and particularly detriment to investors and sort of determining whether there are any breaches or potential breaches, and then using this sort of our proportionality in terms of what powers are available. And I think what's really important is sort of before we get to using our powers, sort of leveraging on the good relationship we had in the industry, sort of building on that relationship and trying to come to a good sort of outcome without going all guns blazing and using our regulatory powers to sort of suspend the fund or deregister the fund or sort of take those sort of steps. So,
Well, it was very hard to find a case scenario for this because we started off with a few, and then we realized that there's always a different way of looking at it. So we had to find one that was kind of black and white, even though commercially we had sympathy with Benji and Carlos because probably everyone would want the investment to go through, but if it didn't, then they would look to the EIF directors eventually and the regulator. So this is not really a commercial decision. This is more of a regulatory issue, and I don't think you are being asked to arbitrate.
no, but in terms of sort of the discussion that I was having, it probably went on longer than we would have allowed it to go on, and sort of we would have understood what each side was coming to the table with, and then I think that would have been enough for us to go away and make our decision. And clearly, we would never be in the position where we would authorize a breach of the PPM. Clearly, right. And I think I would sort of provide that we are very aware of commercial sensitivities, and we try to meet sort of industry as far as we can, but there is only so far we can go before we have to sort of put our foot down and say, look, we can't carry on with these sort of potential breaches and sort of potential breaches of the PPM, because ultimately, like was mentioned before, this is what the investors signed up to, so that there would never be a situation where we'd say, yeah, go ahead, because this is obviously a good deal, so go ahead, break the PPM. That's never going to be something that we're going to be going for.
Right. Benji, asking you now as Benji and not as
Take off one hat, put on another hat.
yeah. So
look, I mean, I think in a situation like this, it's you have many of these kind of I guess debates in the boardroom, different I guess agendas, different interests. You'd like to think that every possible creative solution has been exhausted before you end up going to the regulator. I think, you know, and we discussed some of them, but there are many others out there, and you'd like to think that the EIF directors would collaborate with the, I guess, the managers or promoters in looking for other creative solutions. What could we be doing with this investment? Can we put in a certain clause in the investment agreement? Are there other things that you can do to essentially not, you know, step on any of the rules in the PPM? And I think that's probably, you know, if you've exhausted all of that, you've got to the end point and you think, there's nothing else we can do over here. There is no other way to skin this cat. We have to either make the investment or abide by the PPM. Then you'd like to think that everyone in the room would say, let's abide by the PPM and not break any rules over here. But before you get to that point, you'd want to actually try everything else and see, because there's normally there is some creative solution out there. There is some constellation for this transaction or what have you that will get everybody happy.
It was actually really hard to find a scenario where there was no solution at all. It kind of had to be time sensitive and binary, but it was really hard because usually, because there are always issues. There are always issues, but usually you can find some way to make it work. Usually you have a little bit more time, and so you can go to the investors if need be, or there's some other solution. But here, it really was quite binary.
I think the EIF directors sometimes find themselves managing people as well. When you have a very dominant character like Carlos was playing, who's adamant that it's going to happen his way, it can be quite difficult to maneuver that person into where you want them to get. And at times, it does just require to say, you know what, this just isn't happening, because there's clearly no room for negotiation.
And I think the EF directors managed that situation quite well in terms of providing the challenge to Carlos, I'm not sure what your character was called, but providing the challenge to Carlos and to Benji, and that's sort of what we expect EIF directors to do on the board. They're sort of, as James mentioned before, they're sort of an extension of the FSC like on the board, and they sort of provided that good independent challenge, and that's exactly what we'd expect as FSC.
Carlos, despite your Oscar-winning performance, I will welcome you back to the fit and proper now. Any questions or comments from the audience? What do you all feel? How would you have liked this to end? So,
should we do a show of hands for which decision was, which way they should?
Yeah. So,
That's Andy's idea.
Formulate the question. Right. Should they have been allowed to make the deal? Oh, sorry.
What I would have tried, and it's something that was mentioned by the I think it was his director, the commercial director, was if you really know your client that well, I'm sure there must be a way of maybe doing a quick round robin to get a resolution approved by the shareholders to approve the deal to go through, to get the approval.
I was thinking about that, and in the unlikely event that they could have gotten all of the investors to sign off that night, like to get someone to draft a sign off and to get them all to sign off that night, you could make a strong argument that the investment should be able to be made.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only way I could think.
Yeah, yeah. It was really hard to find an impossible situation. But so let's take a poll. Should the investment have been allowed? Well, should they have gotten? No. What is the question? Should the investment have been made or not? So if you believe that they should have been allowed to make the investment, let's put it the other way. If you believe that the investment, which is undeniably a fantastic investment, should that fantastic investment have been prevented? Those who say yes.
Could have breached.
Yeah.
If there was no other solution,
So, all right.
James, I think you should ask, should they have allowed the breach to take place?
Okay, good. I like that even better. Should they have allowed the breach to take place?
But I think they could have come up with a solution, and if I was in that position in real life, I would have tried a bit more to help and come up with a solution.
You
Picked up the
tried.
phone, called
You tried,
them.
it didn't work, it was not possible.
Yeah, but if it's not possible, then yeah, I agree.
But the rest of the investment strategy was wide, right? So maybe they could have structured the deal in another way. That wasn't buying the property that had valuation.
But if we're all saying that we shouldn't allow the deal to take place, then I guess we're saying is that the regulator should have exercised powers. Is that right? That's all we're saying?
Practically, would you have been able to tell them that you cannot fire these directors, or
I think from a legal perspective, probably not. But then the minute they fire the directors, then the fund is in breach because they're required to have
well,
two
let's say that they
directors.
replaced them. They replaced them with another, with as you put it, Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's not that simple, because obviously if a fund fires two directors and clearly there's an issue there that we have to investigate, so we would conduct exit interviews with the two EF directors to understand what the issues were, or if there were any issues. And then we'd also have to approve the two new EAF directors onto the board, and then still the investment hasn't taken place. But we'd be aware that the potential breach was there, so then perhaps we would have grounds to take further action pending investigation.
There are powers as well that the FSC can exercise in emergency situations. So some of the really drastic ones, like revoking an authorization or suspending authorization, require typically the DMC to be involved. Now that takes time. Like, how quickly can you get those 6 people in a room? How quickly are they going to be able to make a decision? How quickly can the team formulate their report? But if there's an immediate detriment to the public or to the jurisdiction, then they can intervene with emergency powers that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do in normal circumstances. And I would think that in that situation, it is bordering on, after that meeting, it probably would have been bordering on permitting emergency powers to be invoked, because otherwise they would have potentially been in breach of the PPM. The regulator would have had no idea what the true valuation of that property would have been and the possible loss to investors.
question to everyone, including the audience. What's to prevent them from making the investment? How would the fund technically have prevented them from making the investment?
Well, the EF directors wouldn't sign the agreement. They're the ones that would sign it, no?
So they just sign. Usually, one director can sign an agreement. No one asks for the resolution as to whether they signed it, as to whether the investment was authorized.
But they can't pay the money.
Sorry?
That's the doctrine of indoor management.
Of
Indoor management. Royal British director can.
well, yeah, yes, exactly. And this is particularly for those who have read the Gfia Code of Conduct from 2014. What would have prevented them from making this investment, in spite of the objections of the EIF directors?
The bank mandate?
Yes, who said that? Yeah, explain.
Because the bank, without having, the directors, the EIF directors have to sign on the bank mandate, to approve. Well, the bank would want to see the bank mandate, the thing approved by the EIF directors, and without it, the bank would not have the mandate to transfer the funds to complete the transaction.
So I don't think that the bank will ask for the resolution, but I would argue that if the fund has been structured correctly, the EIF directors and everyone will have ensured that no one has access to the money in an unfettered way. You'd have to have either, in fact, the Code of Conduct says that only regulated individuals, such as EIF directors or fund administrators, or you could argue investment managers, should be able to sign on the fund's bank accounts. And So if it's established correctly, then the EIF directors would be in a position to prevent that investment from being made. But if it was established so that Benji and Carlos had sole authority on the bank account, even if it's dual authority, but just the two of them, we would be in a very different position. Yeah.
There is a scenario where the outgoing EIFs or directors all say for a bit before they could put the bank under notice.
Franco, yes, that's a very good point. But you know,
Put the bank in an invidious position.
yeah, exactly. The bank has to won't know what to do. But you know what? When a bank doesn't know what to do, are there any bankers in the room? Usually they don't do anything.
I think property is actually, a property transaction is a really good example in this scenario, because whilst the payment might never leave, the fund might find itself in a really difficult situation where a dominant director like Carlos signs to exchange, contracting the fund to purchase the property, but then the fund finds itself in breach because it can't actually make the payment later on because Carlos isn't the sole signatory in the account. So whilst the signature, having the EIF directors as a signatory on the account stops the money leaving, it would potentially still be liable to complete on that transaction because of Carlos's negligence, I guess, in signing it. It might find itself in a difficult situation.
It'll be in a default.
Conveyancing lawyers to ensure that they've got the authority to sign away on the property.
I hope so.
The question there for the FSC. So if the investment managers decide to circumvent the EIF directors and go ahead with the thing anyway, does the FSC has any powers then to kind of say, look, the fund is in breach or something like that, or?
Yeah, so potentially, because then that would have resulted in a breach of PPM. So then there potentially would be powers for us to sort of take further action.
I'm guessing this sort of thing doesn't happen very often, obviously not in this sort of circumstance, but as a regulator, would you like to have more dialogue with EIF directors? Are we coming to see you enough, even if there aren't problems? Maybe there are no problems in the jurisdiction at all, but I'm just intrigued to hear.
So no, we don't use our powers or the regulatory powers that much, and like I say, they are really a last resort for us. We try and do everything we can to not use them, and that's usually leveraging on our good relationship we have generally with the industry. So what's the second part?
No, it's whether you want to
engagement.
have dialogue.
Absolutely, yeah. So our door's always open, and we want to engage as much as you want to engage with us. So we're never going to turn down an opportunity to meet with one of our funds. And from our perspective, the more we meet with our funds and the EIF directors, the better, because that's again going to improve and sort of improve our sort of relationship with the industry, and that sort of creates the trust that we want to sort of build into our industry. So for sure.
That's a regulatory model that we have here that I think we're really lucky to have. In a bigger jurisdiction, even with goodwill, it wouldn't be possible. But that's something that we can do here. We could just pick up the phone and speak with you when it's necessary. And I always tell clients, you have to see the regulator as your partner in this. And it's difficult because sometimes they come from other jurisdictions where just because it's so much bigger, it's harder to see that as being the case. But here it really is, because everyone can speak to each other. Yeah, Joe.
So if I put the lack of respect and trust in the board on one side for a minute, I want to talk about the lack of leadership of the board. So obviously at that meeting we had 2 against 2. The EIF directors, which would have had the ultimate liability if something had gone heads up or whatever. And the conversation that you then had with the regulators, would that not really be something that the board should have had internally through the chair, that kind of mediation conversation? Because it just didn't seem that there was any kind of clear leadership in that board meeting, that couldn't make a decision. I mean, complete lack of respect, obviously, I wouldn't want to work with people like that at all, but just no leadership at all.
I mean, I think, you know, we try to bring something that's a little bit kind of real life. A lot of times you have breakdowns and deadlocks in the board, so it's difficult to have leadership when you've got, you know, a split kind of down the middle as well. You don't have, you know, unifying voice really. So that's what we try to kind of show is, you know, the real kind of debate you'll have within a board, and sometimes there's no, you know, there's no leadership in that situation. There's no agreement.
There's not always a chair of the board that will take the final decision with the rest of the chair of the board.
I think in real life scenario there would have been a lot more dialogue, we would have tried to work together. I think in this scenario we wanted to end up where we weren't agreeing with each other, just to end up at the regulator and not keep you here for 4 hours. So, but I agree with you, I think there would have been more dialogue and someone would have, you know, tried to find more solutions and stuff like that.
Usually one of the EIF directors would, I think, try and chair as well.
Yeah.
Those meetings for exactly that reason.
And
Probably
Patricia
would have
did.
spoken just to Benji as well, because you were being more calm and trying to be willing to negotiate perhaps one-on-one, first of all, you know, to see if that you could at least reach some sort of arrangement rather than just dealing with 2 against 2.
I think in this case, actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was the chairwoman who suggested that they go to the regulator, and she could have gone on her own, but I think in this particular case, both sides wanted to be there to put their positions forward. So and that wouldn't be the fault of any chairman. So actually, unintentionally, I think that's how it happened.
You'd like to think that there'll be some negotiated agreement at some point in time. There, you know, the board would agree, or somebody would back down. But this is, you know, an extreme case where nobody did and ended up at the regulator.
One thing that I noticed was, and I'm not particularly experienced with the funds industry, I come more with an insurance background. But what I noticed from the composition of your board was that there was no non-executive director, which could have come with a more independent voice into the panel. So is there a reason why there was no non-exec?
Well, the EIF directors are pretty much non-exec.
Non-executive as well, yeah.
It's not a requirement like in insurance boards where you have non-execs.
Okay.
But in practice, yeah, the EIF directors are not there to make investment decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They're there for their compliance background.
Mm.
I just went back off what you mentioned beforehand about obtaining consent from all of the investors in 24 hours. Wouldn't there be a real litigation risk that those investors aren't given fully informed consent, especially if they don't have that external evaluation?
Huge. But arguably, if they all agreed to it and it was drafted well enough, I think it's mitigated to some extent. But they could certainly always come back and say, look, you put a gun to our heads, and we couldn't possibly have thought about this. You said that if you told me that if I didn't sign, everyone was going to lose everything, which of course they always do. So you're right. There was no time for independent advice, and getting the investors' approval is not always that easy. You're very right to point that out. So thank you.
Yeah, if I was one of the EF directors, I'd be a little bit worried about what Benji and Carlos might say to the investors in the process of getting them to sign that shareholder resolution. If I would probably be asking that the administrator send it out rather than these
Excellent point.
guys.
Yeah. Anyone else? Benji, tell us what we have coming up in the future.
Right, so just I'll take the opportunity to plug our next event. In a couple of weeks' time, we have an event that it's actually targeting EIF directors again, but really I think it has a widespread interest for the members of Gfia members. So you'd have all seen this flyer, crypto risk management. So I think people involved in the blockchain, the cryptocurrency industry have found, especially with crypto funds, that managing crypto risk is very different to managing risk with alternative assets, or with traditional assets rather. So we have an event put together 16th of February where we're going to be having a panel discussion with crypto experts, some of them homegrown, some from the outside, where we're going to be discussing specifically that risk management within cryptocurrencies and cryptocurrency markets and investments. So highly recommend for you guys to join.
Getting back for a second, it's interesting, and I think actually quite correct, that the powers of enforcement are not with the EIF directors, they're with the regulator. Anyone want to take a stab at why that's a good idea? In other words, the EIF directors are there to ensure corporate governance and compliance, and yet they don't have any powers that are greater than any other director. So, in a way, it seems as if they're given a task, but are they really given the tools in order to accomplish that task?
Someone's hand way up.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I think the regulators also see things from a jurisdiction point of view rather than the EIF's directors, which may have a much narrower view of things, even though, we like to believe that they would also have the jurisdiction, in thinking, in favor, on top of their minds as well, but obviously the regulators have a much wider view concerning the entire jurisdiction, and that's why it's best, I think, that the final decision would be made by the regulator.
I think it's easier for us to be objective if we're not involved in the sort of the day-to-day of it, so that helps.
Okay, before we close, I'd just like to thank the actors who spent a lot of time with this and who signed up to something that was different and could have turned out perhaps not as well as it did, and so they had the faith to sign up to do something different, and I'm very grateful for that, and for the fact that they also did it really well.